Thank you, Joanne. Glad to be here. Thanks, Thornton, for having us, guys. You can sit down. I may stand. I may sit. You know, we'll see. But I think it was a really interesting talk by Brian. Appreciate that. I think it sets a lot of context for what we want to talk about here. I'm going to ask the panelists just briefly kind of introduce themselves, kind of what they do, their background a little bit. But you know, it's interesting. Gene Signorini, I am Vice President of Mobile Insights at Mobiquity. For folks who are unfamiliar with Mobiquity, we're a Boston-based firm that's strictly focused on mobility. So essentially a services firm that's focused on mobility, and we bring together three core competencies. So we bring together strategy and consulting combined with technology and integration alongside user experience design. So think of us as a combination of a strategy consulting firm, systems integrator, and digital design agency focused around mobile. So we've spent a lot of thinking around obviously mobility, and particularly from that user perspective, right? So how do we design and deliver great user experiences in mobile? And I think this was a great setup for this panel because, you know, Brian talked a lot. It was great because you didn't talk a lot about technology at all, right? I mean, there was, you know, VP of IT, but there wasn't, you know, a lot of discussion around technology per se. It was really about understanding that customer. You know, it's really interesting that, you know, the title of this is Influencing Customer Mobile Behavior. And, you know, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what that means. And I think, you know, what we really have to figure out is who influences customer mobile behavior, right? Or can we influence customer mobile behavior? So I'd like to take some time on the panel to explore that. But before we kind of get into it, Anthony, why don't you start? Just go down very briefly, kind of, you know, your background, a little bit about what you do. That'd be great.
Sure. Yeah. As Joe said, I'm one of the Olin alums here. I graduated Olin in 2008. And right now I'm leading the mobile team at HubSpot, which is a marketing software company in Boston. We aspire to sort of be the Salesforce of marketing. So all the different components of marketing in one product and being able to do everything together in so everything from email, social media, blogging, all in one platform. So I lead the development of our iOS and Android applications as well as some of the product design in that area.
Good morning. I'm Rob Ramrath. I'm the Vice President of IT and CIO at Bose. I've been with Bose for 24 years, and I've been at the CIO under various titles for 14 years. So I've been a long time at Bose. I always like to have a little bit of fun. How many people in the audience own a Bose product? I think that's almost everybody, so that's a great percentage. So I don't have to tell you a lot.
How many own a car?
Yeah, that's right. So I don't have to say a lot about Bose. We are a global company. We manufacture around the globe. We sell around the globe. We sell through every channel you can imagine. We have direct stores, 400 direct stores around the globe. We have indirect resellers. Best Buy in the US would be our biggest. We have over 4,000 storefronts in Europe of retailers. We have global websites around the world. We have call centers. We have support call centers. So it's a pretty complicated business. We sell to the government in terms of military contracts for our headsets. We're a tier 1 automotive manufacturer, so we got a pretty broad footprint. So it's an interesting business, and it's a great company to work for. I love it.
Thank you. My name is Mark Hinckley. I'm Director of Systems Engineering for Juniper Networks. My team has responsibility for what we call technical enablement, or landing technical enablement, which is preparing our partners and resellers, you know, how to understand our solutions, how to go to market with our solutions. So we sit upstream of the sales organization, and if we do our job right, then the sales organizations can go out to the Red Sox and sell the new wireless LAN solution that Bill's probably going to be calling me on. So we'll talk later. Prior to Juniper, I've been here about 3.5 years, but prior to that, I was the SE director for a company called Nortel Networks on the enterprise side, and Nortel was a 105-year-old company that invented pulse code modulation, the digital switch. So I saw firsthand what technical discontinuity can do to the incumbent companies or the big powerful companies. It can fundamentally wipe out a century of innovation just with one technology leap. So you know, excited to be here and be part of the panel.
Great, thanks, gentlemen. And you know, I'd like to make this an interactive panel. So I've got some questions, some ideas that we've talked about as a group in the panel, but definitely want to keep this open to questions. So I'll be kind of prompting you guys as we go along. But maybe the first question I kind of want to throw out to the group is really, as I said, related to kind of the title and the overarching theme of the panel, which is influencing customer mobile behavior. And the question is, can we influence customer behavior, or really is it more of a feedback loop, right? I mean, who is actually influencing mobile behavior, right? Is it the consumer that's kind of dictating to us, or the user, I would say, right? So when we think about the customer, it's not just an end user consumer customer, right? Or in the Red Sox experience, a fan, it could be an internal employee, right? That's a customer of ours. So I guess maybe just to get some perspectives in terms of how you guys are seeing this idea of customer behavior, right? Are we pushing to them, or are they pushing to us, or is it a bit of both?
Yeah, if maybe I just kick off for some discussion. I'll kind of keep it brief. So let me ask a quick question. How many folks in the room in the last, let's say, quarter, let's say the last 3 months, 3 or 4 months, have gotten a new smartphone device? Yeah, so enough, right? 30, maybe 30%. So when we set up the question, I kind of look at, can we influence IT? So the first thing that I think, and I'll speak to it in the context of me and kind of how I work within my organization. So this is not, a Juniper position, right? But just from what I see in the job is, who is we, right? Is it the IT organization that creates the influence? Is it the consumer? Is it us as a customer? I think one of the biggest influences for me, my family, for my employees, the way we interact and use mobility is, I think life really, the way we interact just at a human level is really influencing the usage of the device. I was thinking about, Brian, when you were talking about, new uses of technology, and this might be something that's already on the docket, right? But I thought about the wireless stuff, and I thought, wouldn't it be cool if the fans who love to be, couch quarterbacks and after the fact coaches, right? Wouldn't it be cool if they had the ability to do on-demand instant replay on their own mobile device from any particular camera angle? They could click on camera 22 because I want to see and I want to make the call in my seat, right? But those types of things, right? I mean, I think about that as a fan, right? You probably are all over that stuff, but is that? Yeah. But I bring it up because is that driven by me as a customer? Is it driven by IT as an organization? I'm thinking it's really driven by the way I live my life and the access to content that I want to have. And I know that we're taught that mobile devices are consumers, but more and more we're initiating the content, right? We're not just consuming the content, we're defining how that content and the context of that content is viewed and looked at, beyond just videos. It could be anything like that, right? So I would say, who is we? Who is the influencer? And then I look at myself as it's me, not an employee, not the end user, not the customer. It's me, it's Mark, and how do I interact with this widget,
From the standpoint of enterprise IT, one of the biggest struggles we experience is trying to understand the needs and the wants. So when you look at enterprise systems, your ERP system, your CRM system, you've got a pretty focused customer base who you can work with and really understand what they need. Okay, we want to be able to do drop ship to QVC. We want to be able to do installment billing in our stores. And you can get that done for them. The metaphor that I use, the analogy I use with our customers to try to help understand is it's like being in the cafeteria at 12:30. You hear lots and lots of voices, but you hear no messages. So what we try to do is we take a variety of approaches to understand of all that noise out there, what's the real signal? Is there any harmony to what they would like, and try to converge on that and deliver to that? And that's really difficult. We really do struggle with that.
Yeah, I think just building on that a little bit, I think it's to the point where we're building a B2B product, and I think B2B products have lagged consumer products, and I think enterprise products even more. Like sort of lagging consumer expectations, and I think I've talked to a lot of customers where they just don't, or we're working on an app feature or something, and there's this idea that if you think you should have access to something on the go, it's a deficiency in products you use and companies you interact with if it's not there. On the way out here, I didn't know which building it was in, and I was frustrated that I had to go and search through my email on my device. But of course, I expect that I could do that, and I think that's the transition from, is it a nice to have, is it a value add, or is it a thing that consumers and people in businesses just expect from any of their providers, that you can access it on your phone anytime, anywhere.
So I mean, it certainly sounds like that we're in a bit of reactive mode, right? In terms of what consumers are demanding. Again, whether those are employees or actual end customers. But at the same time, we certainly have seen kind of customer behavior change, right, with the emergence of new technologies, right? I mean, this expectation kind of emerged because of the things we've gotten used to using, right? And you could probably argue that, folks like Apple, right, and folks like Facebook and Twitter, perhaps they're the ones who are beginning to influence customer behavior by the new technologies, by the new ecosystems they're creating, and in turn kind of creating this this new set of expectations. So I guess the next question then is, if we're not kind of creating this consumer behavior, or at least the vast majority of companies or individuals aren't kind of influencing this behavior, how do we manage or align expectations, right? So I maybe there's a couple of questions related to this, right, which are, how do we, I think first, Rob, to your point is, how do we gain a deeper understanding of the needs and requirements of our users, and then how do we kind of manage to those or deliver on those expectations, I would say, within our kind of constraints and context. So maybe take the first one, I think is interesting, is what are some of the things that we can do to really understand kind of user behaviors. I think Brian talked a lot about that in terms of trying to capture that data. He did at the Weather Channel and now at the Red Sox. How do we do that? In particular, how do we do that for employees? Because we spend a lot of time trying to understand our end customer user behaviors, but I think we kind of in some ways give a little bit of short shrift to internal employees in terms of how we identify what they may need.
I didn't mean to steal it out of your hand. I think if we look at how do we influence it? If we kind of start with just maybe 2.5 years ago, and we look at the way mobile devices, and this can be smartphone and or tablet, right? But if we look at mobile devices, we started out with, it was about getting email. So the expectation, the access was all about, can I go to email? And then we started getting into the web browser, right? When the smartphones, the screens got bigger, the processors got faster, and then it was more about, can I get access online? Your example of wanting to search right now and get to the right building, it really started to become more and more about speed. And back to my opening point about it's about me and how I live my life and how I'm connected. I want to be able to have all the different elements of access on the device. Without necessarily having to go through the hurdles of, this is how I get into corporate, this is how I launch my VPN client, and this is how I connect to the ERP database. I just want to be able to have a lightweight application on my device, that I can use to get in. So I think that if you can address the access, if you can address the way you go through security, in terms of the device and authentication, if you can just make it simple, and maybe that means starting out with a set of applications or capabilities that that are currently limited, but they satisfy that sense of speed and give me the basic parameters of what I'm looking for on the mobile device. I see that's where we're at. I know for my engineering teams, it's all about being out with a customer, and a customer asks a question. In technology, there's just no way. We talk about vertical orientation versus horizontal orientation in terms of your skill, maybe the domain expertise, Bill, you talked about, versus end-to-end horizontal expertise and being able to talk more systemically. And in technology, it's very, very hard for an individual, an engineer, to be able to talk end-to-end. So they need to augment that, right? So having speed on a device, being able to access information in a way that can get them what they need quickly, but maybe not as in-depth as what I could do on a desktop or a power station. Those are the things that that we're trying to do. So I think, to answer the question, if we could deploy applications that meet business need, but I think they still have to have some limitation because you can't just turn on a full-blown, client-based app that you would run on a PC.
So, but how, and Rob, maybe, because you mentioned this whole, analogy to the lunchroom, right? So, how do you kind of get through the noise to really kind of understand, what are those business needs, right? Or, is it business needs and user needs, and how do you kind of balance the two?
Let me first pick up on a point Mark made, and that is that about 2 years ago, in corporate information services, the big monolithic IT group within the company that I manage, we started to understand, well, hey, wait a minute, we've been working really hard on enterprise systems. So those systems that really automate and streamline business process across the company. And I think we've been doing a pretty fair job at that, but we started to understand, wait a minute, we've got to start thinking about the productivity of the masses. And I don't mean the productivity of the line workers in the factories. We've got that pretty much understood. I'm talking the productivity of, for the lack of a better term, knowledge workers across the company, some 4,000 to 5,000 across the world. What can we do and what do we have to do for them? So the first thing we started to do was look at blocking and tackling. So this is a new part of our charter of the organization, and we started to do things like replace the phone systems with voice over IP systems, and that leads to so much productivity opportunity. It's amazing some of the feedback we get. For instance, we've got a voice lookup capability on the phone, and just something so simple people absolutely love, where you can buy somebody 5 or 10 minutes a day. They really appreciate that. The smartphone in my pocket has a SIP client on it, so I can take and make Bose calls on my smart device using the PBX at Bose that we have across Massachusetts. Ubiquitous wireless that works everywhere very reliably. That's a key starting point as well. You have to have that. We're just deploying Microsoft Direct Access. So you talked about getting past the hurdles of things like VPN, the 15-year-old technology. So we're doing that. So that's part of the process, and then you've got to have mobile device management applications to try to streamline the deployment of applications to employees, the configuration of applications for employees, helping them through that. But directly to your question, Gene, we're attacking it in a number of ways. One of the things is we've had to recognize that we've got this huge machine of an IT department that's pretty good at core classical infrastructure delivery, pretty good at delivery of core enterprise application functionality to automate that business process. But this whole idea of this incredibly fast-paced, changing world of mobility and the associated devices, we really weren't prepared to deal with that. You can't plug that into the big machinery and expect it to digest it and produce something. More often than not, it will spit it out, because there is a huge contradiction between everything you do with mobility, and that is fast, fast, fast to the good enough threshold. And then this classical group is all about how do we make SAP run perfectly with 100% reliability. So it's antithetical to them to put out something that's just above threshold that's going to be defective. But this smartphone we have in our pocket is a highly defective device. It crashes all the time. You lose your signal all the time. The apps you download, half of them stink. They crash all the time as well. But it's a matter of it's all continuous improvement. So what we had to do was start to think, okay, we've got to have something of a separation from an organizational standpoint of a new organization to deal with this. So we've got an organization called Mobile Applications Group. We've got an application called, it's a Rapid Development and Deployment Group inside CIS, Corporate Information Services. And these groups are all about sort of the ethic and the value system of mobile applications and mobile devices, which is really different from the enterprise approach. And then, of course, you have all kinds of internal people struggles that you have to get through of haves and have-nots, and get people not to worry about things like that, they get to have fun all day and play things and throw things out there and test, and they've got all the latest devices and so forth. So there's a lot of internal things you got to worry about there. Basically what we do is their charge is to make sort of the other part of IT, the enterprise part of IT, make them look like heroes. So you make them look like heroes, and you stand back when there's credit to be taken, stand away from the podium and let the enterprise guys take the credit, and then they'll love you, and then they'll want to get things from you.
Great. A couple things I want to come back to in a second on that, but Thornton, you have a question?
I
Go ahead.
just want to say, last night during our discussion, we basically said, like, the people who are going to make money in this environment, right, are not basically the device people, right? We got to get rid of the idea of the device and focus on the person. And here's, and you asked that question, how do you do that? I mean, you're knowledge workers. Here's the ticking bomb at the basis of IT careers, if you will, is we don't know what knowledge workers do. You know, basically, Ralph Laura, CIO at Clorox, says, like, basically, I'm turning my entire IT staff into basically anthropologists, right? They're out there trying to figure out what's going on. Basically, Steve Davis, who's working for corporate IT at Walt Disney, basically says, like, he's looking at 88,000 people. He's doing the world's largest workplace ethnography now, because the reality is he doesn't know what his people are doing.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be...
Like, you know, how can we do IT without that? And so, like, what am I going to do with this device? No, what does that person do with it, right? And so I think that's a real question, because we've been doing systems of record, which we've automated the industrial processing, and we've done a great job, despite some of the vendor and the software that we have, right? You know, but now we got to understand the individual, and I'm not really certain we're ready to do it.
Yeah, and Thornton, to your point, I mean, that was a question I was going to ask, is it's not only understanding what people are doing, but also understanding those personas, right? Just as, you could have multiple fans going to a game, right? But those fans are all very different, right? So the same thing, you can have a knowledge workers, which we put into this big bucket. We know each knowledge worker has maybe their different functional role, but they also have a different persona, right? And a different, use of, profile in terms of their information needs, their communication requirements, their proclivity toward technology, all of those things. So, one of the questions was, how do we tackle that challenge within the enterprise, right?
Bring it back to Brian. I think where we're going with knowledge workers is our knowledge, the people who work, are going to be just like the baseball players, right? They're going to be on stage, they're going to be watched, and they're going to be statistics. And they're going to be analyzed down on basically, people walking around the streets of London as to, like, what they're doing right.
Yep.
I think it's kind of a frightening future, but that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, this is fascinating discussion, and to me it hits right back on the opening point about who are the influencers. So, I wouldn't be so all bought in that corporate is going to know what the knowledge worker does and be able to dictate properly what the knowledge worker should do. I think that one of the things that's so cool about mobile devices and just the innovation in the industry is I think that the users, I think that the consumer in the context of consuming information services, I think that a lot of those knowledge workers are going to define what they want to do with these mobile devices. That will in turn set expectations. That in turn will influence corporate delivery structures and governance and things like that. You brought up a key word, though, Gene, persona. One of the things that you have to do when you look at mobile devices and even their access, and it's not just limited to the security paradigm, but you really want to start to look at this thing called context, or this notion of digital fingerprinting. You want to look at attributes of the device itself. You want to look at attributes of the user and their identity, and you want to look at attributes of what they are doing, so their context. And from that, you can actually figure out what are they using, what are they accessing, and how. And you can then start to take that in the context of big data and start to figure out what are these personas or personalities of these mobile users, and how do I best serve them, and what are the policies that we put out there. Those are some of the things that we think about a lot.
So we do at Mobiquity, part of our design process when we do work with companies to build applications, we go through a persona development, but much that's done for pure end customer facing applications, right? I mean, the question is, right, because that's where companies are willing to invest. Do you think that enterprises have the appetite to go through this persona development, really understanding who their knowledge workers are? Maybe Rob, maybe that's a question for you. I mean, love to get the entire panels and maybe other folks in the audience, because do you think enterprises are really willing to invest in, okay, we need to do that type of rigorous persona development, user needs analysis, user needs assessment that we would do for our external customers? We need to do that for our internal employees.
Well, I'd ask a question back, never having done it myself. It doesn't strike me as something that would be radically expensive. So when you say invest, I don't know. So maybe somebody who's done it can tell me, is it really expensive or not?
Well, I mean, it's time and effort, right? I mean, it's time and effort, which is,
but when we talk about, the folks from Return on Intelligence, we're basically talking about this whole sensor thing, right? I mean, it used to, if you bring in like the herd of consultants, the Accenture, not a sponsor, all right, maybe, a value destruction thing idea, but anyway, are you getting that on tape? But anyway, all right, but no, I mean, you do not bring in these genetically perfect like individuals who charge $1,500 an hour to basically watch your people around. You basically take the progressive thing, the snapshot thing, but you put it in your knowledge worker's basic pocket. Those sensors cost you nothing. Marilyn, you want to jump in?
Well, I think that you collect the data about your employees in order to influence behavior and understand behavior from their actual use of the device. I mean, and from the data that you're collecting after this, privacy, all kinds of issues that, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just want to make sure.
There are going to be issues with privacy that you've got to address, but if you use higher education as an example, and if you look at some of the massive online courses, people are beginning to collect information about how students learn. They never really understood exactly how students learn and how to break it down. And do you do it by building competencies and building databases? Yes, but that takes time. What you have is you have these incredible sources of information right on the devices that you can begin to collect. Just like, as we talked about last night, the banks and the credit card companies did with the credit card data years ago, and they learned an incredible amount about the actual behavior of their customers and the trends in behavior.
Thank you. So, Anthony, maybe, very interesting. Anthony's, you guys do a lot of design for business users, right? So you're selling software that business users use, and so you probably have spent a lot of time in trying to understand some of those requirements. I mean, how are you guys kind of tackling that challenge?
I mean, I think we start with, as I said, the things that people expect to have on the go, on their mobile device. And I think those are driven by other tools that are out there where if a marketer that's trying to use HubSpot doesn't find the features they need in HubSpot, it's so easy to find another tool that you can run in parallel. Maybe you store something in a Google Doc because it's easier to collaborate with your team in a Google Doc and then export that and import it into our tool. And that's a desktop example. But I think it's the same applies to mobile. We just added social media functionality to our app, so you could schedule tweets through our own app and have all the link tracking that we provide. But if we weren't providing that, we did that because people were complaining, saying, I want link tracking. Can you put that in my Twitter app? And we don't have that kind of access.
So how are you unearthing those kind of requirements? Because I think, as Rob mentioned earlier, right? I mean, the speed of mobility, the pace of change, the pace of feedback is so different, right? It's so. How are you guys actually? How are you funneling that through? How are you capturing that?
I think we're very lucky in because we build marketing software and we're a marketing company. We use all our own software, so oftentimes we hear some concerns from customers, but most of the feedback comes from our own internal team. So people who are using HubSpot software to actually do their jobs sit right down the hall from me, and they can come over and say, why can't I post from our app? And I think that gives us a big leg up. But on top of that, it's we have a very open support line. We try to be very proactive and collect user feedback and customer suggestions, and the same things come up again and again, and we try to focus on those first.
We have a question here. Great.
It sounds like with a lot of the conversation, hinting around but not necessarily saying that you're talking about user-centered design or aspects of user-centered design. So is that a very conscious approach or process that you are taking in any of your development?
One of the things we're doing, again, because we don't yet have a clear picture of what the users want, is we're trying to present information from the transactional systems with which people would make information to the mobile devices, so that they can have the information at their fingerprints. All of the big software ISVs, of course, are giving mobile apps to this end. So we're just trying to leverage some of the capabilities that they're offering us and then giving the end users those capabilities while we're still trying to figure out, okay, what are the things that we might build to help people be more effective? So no, not yet. Not user-centered design for us anyway.
I'm not involved in any of the development stuff, but I know from the things that we're rolling out, they are more lightweight versions, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of the new applications are cloud-type applications, but one thing that I think that's is very helpful is they're what I'll call choice-driven interfaces. they're very binary. It's add, delete, yes, no, approve, deny. They're things that are, one choice or the other. It's very simplistic to use on a smaller screen, smaller device. And I think that's going to impact the way applications, as this stuff starts to integrate more directly to business level applications that can run on mobile devices. I think some of that design, that user-centric design, user-centric on a mobile device is going to have to be considered in kind of this choice-driven menuing.
If I could, what does user-centric mean it's a wonderful audience, right? What does user-centric design mean in a regulated industry like financial services? Canada wants to be free, but if you're at Fidelity or State Street, there's some limitations. How are you guys dealing with that?
So, So we do a lot of user testing, empathetic listening, and working with customers. And I work in FCAT, Fidelity Center for Applied Technology, as a product manager there. And so we do a lot of prototyping with user-centric design and really hosting user parties and talking to the customers and really understanding what they do. But one of the key aspects that we do is we come up with a hypothesis of what do we think people are going to do, and then we have the measurements to determine whether or not they actually do those things or don't do those things. And that's one piece of it. I think the other pieces that we talked about a little bit last night with the frictionless idea is finding ways to take the friction out of the mix. So we sort of look at the negative space, focusing on things that prevent the user from doing this. So let's fix those. So let's fix, things that prevent the user from lurking, things that prevent the user from posting, things that prevent the users from joining the community, or whichever it is. So looking at the negative space and fixing those things. But again, I think the biggest thing is really listening and really putting yourself into the shoes of your customer and hearing and seeing what they're seeing.
Well, two wonderful words you use there. It's like Fidelity throwing a party, right? You call it user party.
User testing party.
And this idea of empathetic, right? Which is not a phrase that leaps to mind when you think about many financial service providers.
Well, let me put a few words about State Street. When the mobile device started, State Street said, no, our clients don't need any of that stuff. The reason is we only serve institutional clients. So a lot of people there made the assumption that you come to the office, you have your desktop, so all the applications are on the desk. Not only that, since we're so regulated environment, so everything's secure, they think mobile devices still have an issue with security. Then what happened is that when people start flex work hours and all those things, now we found out a lot of executives, their children are playing soccer or football, whatever. They were at the game, but we need their approval. Then all of a sudden people realize that you don't put it on these handheld device, we can't get their approval, because they say, well, I'll approve it tomorrow, I come. And we really wanted to get it done if it's the last day of the month, or all these issues came. So finally accepted that anything for consumer, even Fidelity is for consumers also. And you need to apply to institution, because that's a way of life, And it really is that, but there is a danger of just listening to customer. I just want to make one point. Henry, for a long time ago, said, if you ask the consumer what you need, they want a faster horse, right? But he created automobile. So how do you anticipate their needs before they even realize it? And that is the disruptive innovation.
Well, that's where we get to innovation, right?
Exactly. That's how Steve Jobs did. He put everything on iPhone. People didn't even expect to have it. Now you have all these things you can do on one device rather than multiple devices. So just listening to consumer, I call level 2 listening, right? Level 1 is selective listening, but level 3 is deep listening, is what they really are talking about.
Yeah, well, it's more about what they need versus what they want, right? So in the Henry Ford example, right, what they needed is to get to places faster, or what they thought they wanted to achieve that is a faster horse. Right? And the same concepts behind what Steve Jobs did is he really thought about what users needed and thought about a different way of meeting those needs, right? Yeah, we've got a question here as well. So, yeah.
Thornton, I can't sit here any longer. I have to make a comment. I'm 58 years old, and it's really great to know that about every 10 years, life repeats itself. And I feel like I'm sitting talking about mobile devices, and I go back to the web world, and we're talking about marketing and all the same words and all the same issues, and the only difference was the footprint, really. And now we have smaller computers and we can do things more. We can go back to client-server days, and we used to talk about, I love this term, what do we call it? User-centric design? Is that like meaning if you don't, the opposite of that is what? Mainframe design or ugly design? So I can't even understand anything that isn't user-centric design. The thing I would, kind of like to bring up is that we're probably, most of the people in this room are the same people that really don't tweet, and we're older and don't get it. And I think today we're talking about mobile design in a way as if it's magic, that somehow younger people can help us do this, and somehow it's creative, and we use these words like feeling. But in fact, I think we're doing the industry an injustice. There is nothing new under the sun. And there's a whole set of methods and processes that can be used, both that's used, by firms like Mobiquity and ours, and it certainly is new to many of our clients. And it's interesting that we've used the word empathy multiple times here. So if there is a body of knowledge, in fact, and again, there's many ways of doing it. It's called design thinking is one concept. And what is design thinking is really how you bring together the disciplines of aesthetics and art, but to business problems. And the number one thing you're doing, we use these words personas, is putting yourselves in the person's shoes. Okay, it sounds to me more like we're looking for cute, interesting ways of using devices, as opposed to working from the business problem in, and then asking the question, how can this new technology help us? And so what I really find more often than not, when we start to talk about mobility, we move into social, we move into Twitter, we move into all these words, except you're not really talking about solving any particular problem. And so I think it's really important that everybody, from my perspective, everybody in the room, is that there really is nothing new. It's about the approach of how we want to re-engineer our business, how we want to impact our customers, and that the techniques that are used today are repeatable, and that the number one skill, the very interesting thing, is called empathy and feeling. Can you put yourself in the other person's shoes? And I mean, it's like the deep listening that we've been bringing up, that Madge brought up. And this deep thinking is really about this ability to literally feel what the other person's feeling. So if you're going into brainstorm, it's not about the purpose is to use the mobile device. The real purpose is I want to fundamentally change how we're doing our business model. And so when you put yourself into the shoes of the other person, it isn't about how he's going to click, but what's his everyday life like. So for instance, we were doing some brainstorming for a particular port in Canada. And one of the interesting conversations was we have $150 million to spend, and we want to really change the world. And it really gets down to, when we use the word persona, it's really saying who are the different, I'm sorry about the microphone, who are the different actors? There's tourists, there are truck drivers, there are tour operators, there are retailers, and what you're fundamentally doing is really trying to understand the broad stakeholders. And again, from the perspective of that truck driver, you're getting back to the basics. What is he or she really doing? And now the secondary question is, how can we deliver information and function to it? So one of the things I just want to bring up is that I think a lot of us in organizations are afraid to say, how do we open up this Pandora's box of mobile? Clearly, it's a different set of skills that we have in our IT shop and things like that. But in many ways, we're repeating the stages that we've seen over and over again. And again, one of the things we talked about last night is it's not about the device. In other words, the devices themselves are a commodity, and pretty soon we'll have a chip in our brain. We'll be talking about the same thing, and there won't be a device. But it gets down to, what I find is that when we talk about mobility and creativity in an audience, we're not able to really describe what truly is the process of design, when in fact there really is one. So I guess I want to just kind of ask a broad question, because we have, you're a user, I think we have two firms We have a CIO that actually create things. So what is the process that you actually use to engage a company in, kind of making change happen? Because one perspective is I want to re-engineer the business, and the other is I want to be cool. And one has a business purpose and the other doesn't. So I'm just curious. I'm just throwing out.
Yeah, well, I'm actually, I'll give you the mic, I'll give one of you guys the mic, but so as a user, I'll tell you what I do and what my team does is we call on CIOs, we call on CTOs, and when we go in and have discussions about re-engineering the process, it's all about speed and competitive advantage. I mean, there's a cost element, but more and more it's about speed and advantage in the marketplace, and I agree that devices don't matter, but they do at some level because they are a tool, and tools have varying degrees of capabilities. There's a difference, between a butter knife and a scalpel, right? So at some level, hardware systems and tools and all that matter. But yeah, for us, it's all about how do we use mobile? Let's just use that as a broad term to accelerate time to decision, time to speed. How do I use the device for that? In the applications themselves, it starts out, I think Madge had a great, it's just a great simple example of you got the executive at the soccer game and he needs to approve something. And that's how it starts. And I'm seeing that now in the way I use it, the way my team uses it, and what we do, and what our customers are asking for is they want to now get beyond saying, yes, I approve the report, or yes, I approve the requisition. And now they want to look at sales forecast data. They want to look at other things that are more predominantly moved into cloud. So I think a lot of the business re-engineering is around, the two big themes, the disruptive themes in my field of technology are cloud and mobile computing. And, cloud is about big data and big information, big data centers. And mobility is all about, these new tools that can help you access, consume, and create content, right? So those are the areas that I look at it.
I think the big challenge in design, as you said, the big challenge in design is that you're oftentimes trying to enable access to something that's very complicated on a device that's very small, and the bar for what people expect has been set so high that there is a lot of very careful, whether you want to call it user-centric design or just design, right? That needs to be done to make an experience that's acceptable, right? I think things that are acceptable, in a command line interface, you can't, those paradigms you can't even apply to mobile. And so, in terms of the process, I think there's, well-established patterns out there for different platforms, and I think it's a matter of how do you connect the patterns that are established to the business needs that you're trying to fulfill. But you're working in that constrained environment, which is a blessing and a curse.
So, maybe Alan, answer your question. And, I would agree with you that you're still trying to solve for business problems, right? You're still trying to solve a business and a user problem, and there's a process to go through to kind of unearth that. In fact, at Mobiquity, that's the notion we take, right? So I'm part of our strategy consulting practice, and what we do is we actually work with companies to identify all of those different opportunity areas within their business, right? Where their business needs to be transformed, where it touches customers, where it touches employees, to identify that, and we marry that with user-centered design. So, the concept behind user-centered design really is mapping out a customer journey, identifying personas, and actually involving the user in the design process, right, to understand how to be using it, right? So we try to marry those two things, absolutely, which is where does really things like mobile impact your business problem or your business challenge? So I would agree with that. Two things I would just note, though, is one thing is I don't think a lot of companies have taken the step to do that with internally facing applications. They do that we've seen a lot of companies, as I said, willing to invest and take the time to do that where a problem or a process touches the customer. But when it comes to employee-facing applications, a lot of what companies have done, right, even before mobility, is kind of said, here's what you get, here's what you're using, right? That's pretty much how it works, right? And the difference, I think, so the one thing I would maybe disagree with you a little bit about is that mobile is a little bit different because it's really the first time that technology has proliferated to this degree to the consumer before it has to general business, right? So in the old world of PC or laptop, most people who had the first interaction with a laptop, or in many cases the first interaction with the internet for a lot of people was at work, right? So, people didn't necessarily go and buy their own laptops, right? Laptops kind of hit kind of corporate world first before they kind of proliferated out to consumer. It's been kind of the opposite on mobile device. Now, BlackBerrys kind of were there, right? BlackBerrys kind of were the first quote-unquote smartphone. But really, when we got to that next generation of smartphone, really with Apple and the iPhone, that really hit the consumer market first. And the proliferation of applications has created, as I said, this expectation, this understanding of what a mobile experience could be for users. And now they're coming back and saying, what can we, and I think users are thinking, how do we use this in our daily lives, right? And the fact of the matter is there's a tremendous amount of things that they can go and do on their own. Right? And it's not just mobile, it's a combination of mobile and cloud, for example, is very powerful, where we've seen users saying, I need a solution to store files, right? So I'm going to go use Dropbox, right? Or I'm going to use these other tools, right? So I think that's the difference, is that we've gotten this new technology set, which is tremendously cheap, in the grand scheme of things, really cheap and really accessible. In some cases, costs nothing, right? In the case of cloud services, costs nothing for consumers who are actually your employees, now to go grab and use. That is, to me, the difference, the slight difference in what happened maybe 20 years ago in kind of PC-centric computing, right? It's just the accessibility of technology to users like never before.
I'm going to throw out something radical. It's 10 o'clock, 10:30. Why not let users build their own mobile applications? So as technologists, I believe that we have to collect the data. We have to enable the data. But there's a convergence of mobile applications and data. So the tools are getting more sophisticated, things like dynamic rendering of applications and templates. Software development languages are being more sophisticated, where they can actually anticipate the next step. All a developer needs to do is say, well, if this happens, then maybe this can occur. So why not let our consumers build their own applications? There are tools out there right now that you can drag and drop on a mobile device and build in less than an hour. It's a terrific concept, and it takes really the monkey off our backs. There are certain things that you can do to put some basic models together, but I say let the consumer run with it, and we just enable them.
Yeah, I mean, it could go back to the guardrail concept that Brian talked about. I mean, it's very interesting. I actually brought up this example myself when I do a lot of presentations. I like to say, there actually are a lot of developer skills now coming out of university, right? I mean, I used to say, joke, if you think 20 years ago, you used to get resumes, and the bottom of it, people would say, like, I'm proficient, I'm skilled with WordPerfect, right, or Excel, right? Who puts that on a resume anymore, right? You're coming out of university, you're expected to be able to use PowerPoint and Word and Excel, right? Those are basic skills. In the future, we could see development skills as becoming basic skills, right? So as a company, can we set up essentially our own, essentially development guidelines, right, and own app store, and say, listen, you're free to kind of develop on our kind of infrastructure according to our standards, and then kind of get submitted for approval, just like developers would submit for approval in the public app stores today. I mean, it's a very, very interesting concept, and I think a very legitimate approach as well. Any thought, maybe from our CIO on the panel? Any thoughts about does that give you the cold sweats a little bit?
No, not at all. I was very interested in Alan's comments. They were edgy and they were sort of unilateral. Gets conversation going from a practitioner who's got to worry about 25 countries and 10,000 employees. When you say it's not about the device, well, I get that from the consumer perspective. From the management perspective, it can be all about the device. Because try to make a device without a file system work effectively in the enterprise is really hard. That's why I'm very much embracing Windows 8. And I think a lot of the people who like to poo-poo Windows 8 are the same people who like to poo-poo Microsoft in general before they even understand. They're really putting together sort of the melding of the enterprise with the consumer. And it's much more tractable in the environment. In terms of Qt applications, we haven't put out any Qt applications. Bose is a lean company. We're all about value. So that's the conversation. Value, value, value. Are we going to bring value to our customers with what we're doing? And in the case of internal IT, more often than not, because we're a product-based company, internal IT is about value to the internal customers. We don't interface directly with our consumers of the corporation. So we're always talking about value to the customer. So this is what we try to do. And no, it doesn't make me break out in cold sweats in terms of internally developed application. You know, you do have to have your frameworks, you have to have your blocking tackling like we talked about with MDM and capabilities there and so forth, which is a fairly big hurdle to get done on an enterprise-wide basis and to get done effectively at the pace of mobile device development. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there. We've talked about it at Bose, we haven't done it yet at Bose. That said, there's stuff going on out there that we occasionally become aware of. It's okay. It's okay. A lot of it is, too, when you get to security, for example, which is a big bugaboo, is really educating people on the fundamentals of security and their part in security, as opposed to legislating it and imposing total technology controls everywhere. Because if they don't understand it, they're going to go around it. All the technology controls won't work, because you'll start to get a whole community using Dropbox, for example, if you don't enable and you don't have people understanding.
When you say, as a question, follow up on that, when you say internal things you've become aware of, you mean people have just started writing their own interfaces or applications to help them do their work more effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're an engineering-driven company, so there's stuff going on all over the place. Yeah, Alan.
Let me answer your question. As an enterprise guy, what I'm finding, I guess the other common element I'm finding across very large companies, I'm working with, let me just say, largest drug company in the world, okay? And so you got just, zillion countries, whatever, and these organizations over time grow through acquisition, so you end up with a situation like 22 of everything, which makes it even harder if you're trying to create an architecture ultimately to drive information. But what I'm finding, what I want to bring up, is that there seems the internal stuff, the internal pressure to go to mobile for employees, what I'm seeing is being driven from the desire to take what we usually call the corporate intranet, or the collaborative portal that we've developed over the last 10 years, as the mechanism, one-stop shop for all of our employees to maybe not just kind of read the company news, but we've developed all those same tools using whatever for everything from employee self-service on HR to I've got a question to you name it, right? So I'm seeing a lot of pressure for the number one is, can we take, because we go home and have more access through Yahoo and Google and everything, why can't we do the first thing of taking our corporate portal and kind of putting it in, the company in a box on a mobile? So rather than even saying, let's reinvent the world, the desire for us now, instead of, like we talked about the PC world, I sat down at my portal, now I'm out playing my ball game with my kid, and I want to do the same thing. So that's really driving to kind of a write once or a design once and run everywhere kind of environment. So I guess, you were talking about internally, I think, not a lot of action on the mobile side. Mm-hmm. But what I guess I'm throwing out to you, what about even something as simple as, kind of driving, let's call it that collaborative portal world down, moving my metrics from my portal down to my little box, and over time what we're doing is creating effectively employee self-service through the cloud. The look and feel here, it's kind of like you were talking about Windows 8. Okay, so again, the client, make the tiles on the screen look kind of like the tiles you would see on the mobile device, and now all of a sudden really the game becomes I'm simply taking those corporate tools and now I'm trying to drive them into a different kind of footprint for my employees. Does that kind of thing make sense to you as a starting point?
Yeah, it does. And the easy way to do that is through the blocking and tackling that I'm talking about, where access, you create easy access all the time. So we're all in with Microsoft Office 365 and Microsoft SkyDrive Pro. So now people's information is moving into the cloud. It's secure. We've put two-factor authentication in front of it that's pretty simple to use. So you go to hit your information in the cloud. So on a non-Bose device or via web access, and you put in your credentials, your phone buzzes, you hit a button on it, that's your second factor, know something, have something, your phone is have something, and boom, they're in. And so they're able to get to their data everywhere, they're able to get to that intranet everywhere on a home computer, on a convertible, even on their tablets, which of course you get lower and lower real estate, that gets harder and harder. I see personally the convergence of the tablet device with the laptop device is really transformational. These devices are getting really small and really functional, the way you can disconnect the screens and so forth. And there's choice out there all over the place. That's kind of one of the ironies. First of all, I have to be careful and put on my Bose hat and say, we love Apple, they're a tremendous collaborator. Putting on sort of my Joe Consumer hat, it's rather ironic because, of course, Apple with their 1984 commercial, the hammer throw, targeting IBM, closed environment, and so forth. Now who's the open environment? The open environment is Microsoft, because you can run Microsoft on anything, so you have tremendous choice. And that, I believe, will really enable a lot of productivity. Whereas in some of the other worlds, whether it's Apple and Android, as a matter of fact, you have much less choice and much less usability. So we're just seeing a lot of, to your point, Alan, a lot of built-in productivity by just opening these things up.
Sounds like you have an architecture, too.
We try. We're not acquisitive, which helps a lot.
Let me get to one more question. Alan, just one point on that. I mean, it's very interesting because you raised the notion, you talked about like tiles. I mean, I think the concept behind portals, I don't know, I'm sure everybody's used a corporate internet and a portal here. I don't know how many people like their corporate internet and their portal, right? I mean, typically speaking, they've become hodgepodges and dumping grounds for everything. Right? It's just the one place to go to find thing, and then you actually can't find the thing you want. So again, it's kind of, I think the idea of self-service is absolutely right, there are things within portals. That's probably a great place to start. We actually have this conversation with a lot of clients as well. I asked that question, what do you guys have in your portal? What's in kind of your dumping ground? Because those are the self-service elements you may need to extract and deliver on mobile. But it's not necessarily just taking the portal and replicating on a mobile device. It's saying, what are the elements within that? What are those self-service elements that we need to extract and provide for our users? So I think you're right. But I think we've probably got time for one last question for the panel. So.
Well, the thing about Apple is it runs everywhere, as long as you're running on Apple, right? If I could bounce in...
It goes back to the
Too bad.
thing again, right?
That's right, as long as it's black. If I could go in the opposite direction from Alan in a question, is to actually ask you about technology that users might not be using right now. I'm wondering, are you seeing any demand for augmented reality applications, and or are you considering any augmented reality applications? Is the Red Sox CIO here?
Yeah.
Vice
President of IT.
Well, actually, I was going to say, Chief Information Wrangler, I guess. But I mean, some early augmented reality applications in the U.S. have come from football watching. So I'm wondering if I could bring you into this panel for a second. Are you looking at any AR? And if not, why not?
So good, kind of a forward-looking kind of question for the panel to kind of conclude. Any thoughts, guys? Maybe Brian, I don't know if you have any comments.
Yeah, I mean, just briefly, we currently are not, not that I don't think there's value. It's probably more in terms of, I guess, where it probably fits in the, pecking order of life. And I think as a company that's probably still doing a fair amount of blocking and tackling to get to a better place. We're not quite there yet, but I think everything is within bounds. Especially as you point out, sports is a great catalyst for a lot of these kind of emerging technologies and trends. So I would expect probably some progress in areas like this in the near future.
Well, I view two convergent trends: is basically augmented reality in baseball and legalizing marijuana. Because it's a 4.5-hour experience.
Somebody was going to say that.
It'll help it to go better.
That's personal augmented reality.
That's innovative. That's certainly innovative. Any thoughts on a panel around that? I mean, one thing is it's very interesting you mentioned that because I actually worked with two clients in industries you wouldn't necessarily think are kind of very innovative. One is a large agribusiness company, and one was utility. And both of them were very interested in the concepts around augmented reality, right? So if you think about, they're scientists out they've got growing fields all over the world, like large agribusiness company, and they've got plots, around these acres, and the ability to literally take a mobile device and overlay and show what seed is being grown in this area, what's the temperature conditions, all that stuff is very powerful. Same thing for, say, a utility, right, who goes out and builds these huge power networks, and the ability to go out and overlay and say, what's here, right, what's here, so there is a lot of it. What's that? Squirrels are there. But no, in terms of the equipment, because right now they're very antiquated in terms of being able to manage their inventory and know what's at a particular power station or on a power line, right, things of that nature. So there is a lot of interest from companies you wouldn't necessarily think are kind of on the innovation curve, and they haven't gotten there yet with it. But I think there's even things with like Google Glass, very interesting concepts there, right? You've got a technician who's up in a pole, right, on a pole, and can't have a mobile device, but if he's got a ruggedized set of, say, Google Glass, right, it opens up some interesting possibilities. So. Yeah, or you can say things like, "Hey, I'm repairing. I'm up and I'm on this tower, and I need to repair something." And this concept of literally, the diagnostics coming up. Maybe the plan, overlaying the plan, and overlaying the diagnostics right on top of the screen for the user.
Brian, you brought up a great, a great topic here, because you could also talk about Google Glass now and heads-up displays and, superimposing visuals on top of visuals. I had the honor, I think we talked last night, I was the CTO for the city of Philadelphia from 08 to 11, and also involved with Homeland Security. So one of the interesting things was kind of watching, developing, and seeing some of these things happen. I don't know what the hell's wrong with this mic. Yeah, let me come forward. So some real specific application. First of all, in cities all through America, including Boston, there is a demographic. It's called kids from 18 to 25 that love to develop apps. Hackathons all over the country. Code for America was developed on the West Coast as a kind of a foundation for how we create ideas around mobility. Ideas around mobility, and then how can you transfer that from city to city almost for free. There's a tremendous number of apps out there that if you actually go up on the stores that are the equivalent of what you're talking about. You'd be walking down Philadelphia, and all of a sudden, up could come, it's almost like you're taking a tour, and as you're walking near things, more information comes up. But the one story, the most interesting thing that I did was when I became the CTO for the city, I went to the neighborhood fire station with my daughter. Right down the street, and we're talking about a fire station built in 1907, and got her a ride on the fire truck, and as the IT guy for the city talked to the firemen, they were complaining about the green screens. And one of the most interesting thing is I don't know why I did, I asked, do you know where my fire hydrant is? My house was 3 blocks away, by the way, built in 1897. And so rather old, and I thought, hey, you're 3 blocks away. And he said, we really don't know where your fire hydrants are, which kind of really scared me. And then I look up on the wall, by the way, and there's, a map of the neighborhoods, I guess, where they serve. The only problem is, and I figured they look at the map. I swear to God, it looked like it was on parchment written by Ben Franklin. And that moment, we started to talk about the art of the possible, and about things that are being done across the country. That next week, getting funding, unfortunately in government you have to kind of get in front of city council, and I painted a vision that we ultimately prototyped. And that is, the next time the fire engine goes off, the GPS, the computer in the fire truck goes up, here's the shortest path to my house, 6368 Drexel Road. By the way, they have heads-up displays and all that other stuff on their goggles. It's telling them, by the way, by querying all the databases in the city, 4 known inhabitants, stucco and brick, no known hazmat materials. Oh, by the way, and I'm making this up, there's an oil refinery next door, and your fire hydrant is exactly at location XYZ. And in fact, you can develop, and there are many applications with, I'm not calling it really, it's not like on the football, where they paint the center lines, but these heads-up displays, which we're now seeing with Google Glass, is the next thing. And heads-up displays in cars, you start to see it. They're talking about putting corneal transplants. But the bottom line is, just like when you do Google Street View, it's very easy. It's almost trivial to build the app on a weekend. So as a policeman is staring at your house, all the data, like in a movie, is coming up right on his, kind of right up. And that's happening today. So the question is there any application in business? Because there sure is a hell of a lot of it in the public sector.
Well, I've got to say, just as a side note, if you can make fire department guys do that, kudos to you, because they are the most reactionary part of emergency services. I mean, they think in 1907 parchment is kind of a little fresh.
Absolutely. They still want the old fire trucks.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. The dog behind that.
Well, I think just being cognizant of time, I think that it's been great. It's always good to be over time because it means it was a healthy discussion. And really appreciate everybody's participation. Really want to thank the panel members. So a round of applause to these guys.